Let's review Pesachim, Daf Memvav. The Mishnah discussed a pot that had a crack in its wall and you filled it with dough. The Mishnah says on Pesach, if the dough patch is a kazayas or more, it must be destroyed. The Mishnah then says that the same halacha applies legabe tumah, which the Gemara finds to be troublesome because by tumah it has nothing to do with the size of the patch. It all depends on whether or not you plan to leave it there as a patch, and then it will be bottled to the keli. Or if you don't want to leave it there as a patch, it won't be bottled to the keli, irregardless of how big that patch is. So Abaya offers an explanation. In all cases, in all explanations, we're assuming that it's larger than the kazayas, this patch, and a person wants to leave it there. So all year long, that would be bottled to the pot. But on Pesach, since that kazayas patch has to be removed and destroyed, it won't be bottled to the pot. Abai says this would be relevant if you had a piece of food, let's call it dough, that was less than a kibetza, that was tameh, and something touched it. So we know oichel that's less than the kibetza cannot transmit tumah to another oichel or a mashka. However, in this case, that oichel of less than the kibetza was touching the dough patch. On a regular day, not Pesach, since that dough patch is not food anymore, it's bottled to the keli because that's where you want to leave it, then this dough will not be able to transmit tumah because it's less than the kibetza. However, if it's on Pesach, where that patch of dough that's larger than the kazayas has to be destroyed, so that means it's not part of the pot, which means we can combine it with the piece of tameh dough that I have to be a shir kibetza, and therefore it will be metama other things. Rava suggested a different pshat because the Mishnah says chaytzeitz. So Rava suggests that we're talking about a tameh pot that has, again, a patch in it that's greater than the kazayas that I want to leave there. So on a regular day, you can toivel it, and that patch won't be a chatzitza because you plan on leaving it to be a part of the pot. But if this occurred on Pesach, where that kazayas of dough has to be removed and destroyed for Pesach, it would also be a chatzitza. The last pshat was from Rav Papa, who says that, again, we're talking about dough that I was mevatel into the pot. However, on Pesach, it has to be destroyed. Well, what if a sheretz touched the pot in just that space, touched that dough patch? Normally, during the year, if I'm mevatel that dough to the pot, it's as if the sheretz touched the pot, and the pot will now become a rishon l'tumah. However, on Pesach, since that dough is considered distinct from the pot because it has to be destroyed, we look at it like a sheretz touched dough that was detached from the pot, which would make the dough tameh, but the dough would not turn around and make the keli tameh, so the keli would remain tahar. And those were the different pshatim in the comparison between Pesach and Tumah. Then the Mishnah discusses an interesting case. You have dough that looks like it's starting to become chametz, but you're not quite sure if it's chametz or not. How could you tell what to do with this dough? So the Mishnah says, find another piece of dough, if you have, that was prepared in the same fashion at the same time as the dough in question, and see if it's chametz. If it's chametz, if it has all the simonim of chametz, it's cracked and all, then you can assume this dough is chametz as well. The Gemara discusses, what happens if I don't have any other dough? I just have the dough itself that I'm not sure about, what do I do? So the Gemara says, the Rebbe Vo said in the name of Rish Lakish, that 18 minutes is the key. It's about the time it takes to walk 1 mil, and if the dough is left for 18 minutes, we say it is chametz. Once Rebbe Vo brings down from Rish Lakish the shear of a mil, Rebbe Vo brings down from Rish Lakish other places where the shear of a mil, the 18-minute time frame, is relevant. And that is in 3 cases. Case number 1 is if you're preparing dough and your kelim are tameh. How far must one travel to be matar the kelim so that the dough will be made b'tahira? Again, the shear is 4 mil, which is 18 times 4, which would be 72 minutes. You'd have to travel up to 72 minutes to find a way to make this keli tahar so that your dough will be tahar. The second place where this is relevant is l'tfila. If you're traveling and you want to daven ma'ariv and stop for the night, but you know that within 4 mil, within 72 minutes ahead of you, there's a shul. So Rish Lakish says that you must push on an extra 72 minutes, up to an extra 72 minutes to get to the shul to daven. And the last case was Netilas Yadayim. For instance, you want to eat and you have a sandwich, but you don't have water. If there's going to be water within 72 minutes, if along your way, head on the road, within 72 minutes you'll encounter water, you must wait until you reach that water. Now, the Gemara tells us that's only if it's on your way. If you're traveling on your way, you have to travel up to 72 minutes. But what if your water is out of the way? What if your mikveh is out of the way? What if your shul is out of the way? How far do you have to travel? Zok to Gemara, you only have to travel a maximum of 17 minutes and 59 seconds. You don't have to travel 18 minutes. Anything less than 18 minutes, you do have to travel. The Gemara brings from Rabbi Ivai a fourth item that also depends on the 4 mil on the 72-minute shear, and that is if you have skins that are very thin and they're edible, so they have tumas oichel. In order to remove tumas oichel from them, you have to dedicate them to be used as hides, like for clothing. What changes the status of these edible hides into non-food item hides to remove the tumas oichel? That's if you start the processing. One of the methods of processing is if the hide is trampled on for 72 minutes. If the hide is placed on the floor and it's trampled on for 72 minutes, that hide is no longer a food item. It's considered a hide and it will not have tumas oichel. Then the Mishnah brings up an interesting shaila. When you make a dough, let's say you want to bake matzahs on Pesach, so you prepare your dough, you'd have to be mafresh challah from the dough, which is like truma, goes to the kohen. What we do with it is we burn it because it's tamei, and the kohen cannot eat truma that's tamei, so we just burn it. What if you were preparing on Yom Tov a dough to bake? You're allowed to bake the matzahs that you want to eat on Yom Tov because you're allowed to bake l'tzarech chol nefesh, but you're not allowed to burn this truma on Pesach because you're not allowed to destroy kachim on Yom Tov. You have to wait till after Yom Tov. It's not called chol nefesh. The problem is if you just set the dough aside and you wait till Matzah Yom Tov to burn it, then it will become chametz, and now you have chametz in your possession. So what are you to do? So Rabbi Eliezer had a simple solution. Don't separate the truma from it until it's fully baked. Once it's fully baked, then separate the truma, or the challah, and this way it won't become chametz. Rabbi Ben Beseir said, no, separate it as a dough, but put that dough, store it in cold water all day, so that it will not be able to become chametz. Rabbi Yeshua said, I don't see the problem at all. It's not your dough. You don't have to worry about it at all. It says, once you make it into truma, it belongs to the kohen. It's not your dough. It doesn't belong to any specific kohen, so no kohen has a problem with it. So there's no need to do anything. Just separate the challah and let it become chametz. It's not a big deal. The Gemara says that what is the machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer, who says we do have to deal with the chametz problem, and Rabbi Yeshua, who holds we don't have to deal with the chametz problem. So the Gemara says, every time you make something truma, you're declaring it with your mouth. It's no different than a nether, which means you could nullify that nether by going to a chacham. Zok Rabbi Eliezer, since even though it's true and it's not mine, but I have the ability to nullify it and make it mine, it's considered mine enough that I have a problem with being over Bal Yirah on Pesach. However, Rabbi Shua said we're not concerned that I might be able to nullify the truma. Right now it's truma, and therefore I'm not over Bal Yirah Bal Yimotzi. Now that we're talking about this hoyel, since I could do something, it leads us into a different shaila. We all know you're not allowed to cook on Yom Tov for the next day. You're allowed to cook on Yom Tov food that you can eat on Yom Tov. So what happens if you cook on the last day of Yom Tov and you didn't cook for Yom Tov, you cooked for the next day? So Yom Tov in the afternoon, the last day, you bake a cake. You're not going to be able to eat it that day. You're going to eat it only tomorrow. What is the halacha? So according to Rabbah, you don't get malchus. According to Reb Chisda, you get malchus. According to Rabbah, you get malchus. According to Rabbah, you do not get malchus because we say if guests come, you can always serve it to them. So technically, it's really considered that you're still baking it for today. Reb Chisda says you're not allowed to bake today for tomorrow. You don't say that since guests could come, I'm allowed to bake, and therefore you do get malchus. The Gemara poses two challenges to Reb Chisda. The first challenge was from the concept of Erev Tavshilin. We all agree that we do cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos with an Erev Tavshilin. According to Rabbah, really midiraisa is not usher anyway because you have a hoyel. So therefore the Erev Tavshilin allows us to cook on Yom Tov for Shabbos. But according to Reb Chisda, where there's an Iser deraisa to cook on Yom Tov for after Yom Tov, how could you allow through an Erev Tavshilin someone to cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos? So Reb Chisda says a huge chiddush that Yom Tov and Shabbos is considered one big kedusha. It's one big Shabbos, and therefore you are allowed to cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos. The reason why we need an Erev Tavshilin is because Midirabbanon, they said, don't cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos, because we're afraid if you cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos, you might also come to cook from Yom Tov to Choil. But since we have Erev Tavshilin, which is a whole big process, a whole big ceremony that you make in order to be able to cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos, we're not concerned that someone would confuse it and cook from Yom Tov to Choil. The Gemara has another challenge for Rab Chisda from a brayso that says if one has an animal that they're afraid is going to die and it's on Yom Tov, he's allowed to shecht it quickly so that it won't become an avela and he could salvage the value of the meat. If you have enough time to roast a kezayis of meat and eat it before Yom Tov is over. Fragt Rabbah, the brayso doesn't say you have to eat it. The brayso just says as long as you have enough time to do it, which is the hoil. But according to Rab Chisda, who says that you don't say hoil, how are you allowed to shecht this animal? So Rab Chisda, this is different, because since there's a lot of money involved, when I shecht this animal, I know that I'm only allowed to shecht it if I'm going to eat a kezayis. So even though I'm not in the mood of eating and I'm not interested in eating, I will have specific kavanah while I'm shechting that animal to eat a kezayis, and therefore the shechita is allowed, even if he ends up not eating it later.